Are you someone who seeks more discipline in your life, but feels like something is broken inside that prevents you from keeping anything going? Most people fail because they rely on explosive motivation that crashes fast, rather than the small movements that make a big difference over time. In Japan, there's a powerful system that transforms the chronically inconsistent into discipline machines. This system relies on two pillars: Shitsuke, the art of designing systems so simple it's impossible to fail, and Gaman, the inner strength to endure discomfort without treating it like an emergency. You don't need more willpower. You need a better design. If you are ready to stop dreaming and start accomplishing, you must be willing to start so small it feels embarrassing. The story of Elias begins in a cold parking lot in Chicago. He stood there, hunched against a freezing drizzle, desperately flicking a plastic lighter that refused to spark. His fingers were numb, and his clothes smelled of stale ash. In his hand was a damp, bent cigarette, the only thing he felt he had control over, yet the very thing that controlled him. This was his fourth, final pack of the month. Elias wasn't weak-willed in other areas of life, but when it came to nicotine, he was a discipline machine in reverse. He was consistently, perfectly unable to quit. He had tried everything. He'd gone cold turkey 3 times, lasting only 2 days each time before the internal screaming became too loud. He had tried expensive patches, hypnosis, and an insane, restrictive health kick that lasted exactly 4 days. Every attempt followed the same terrifying pattern: an explosive burst of motivation, a few days of glory, and then a miserable crash back into the habit. His wife had stopped asking when he would quit. Her silence was a brutal truth that slammed into his face every time he stepped outside to smoke. That night, Elias sat in his kitchen with $847 worth of medical bills on the table and a realization. He was waging a giant internal war every single day and losing because he was fighting with willpower alone. He began researching how people actually change. He stumbled upon the concept of Shitsuke, the art of creating systems so simple it's impossible to fail, and Gaman, the inner strength to endure discomfort without treating it like an emergency. The philosophy was clear. Greatness doesn't come from grand actions. It comes from tiny actions repeated until you can't stop anymore. Elias decided to start so small it was almost embarrassing. Elias began his reconstruction not with a grand vow to never smoke again, but with a ridiculously small adjustment. He understood that big beginnings require large amounts of discipline that he simply didn't have yet. His first application of Shitsuke was to design the environment to add friction. He moved his cigarettes and lighter to a locked toolbox in the furthest corner of the damp, cold basement. To smoke, he would have to walk down 2 flights of stairs and find the key. He didn't tell himself he couldn't smoke. He simply made doing the right thing easier than doing the wrong thing by forcing a deliberate choice. Then came Gaman. He committed to a system so simple it seemed idiotic. Every time he felt the itch for a cigarette, he had to wait exactly 10 minutes before heading to the basement. During those 10 minutes, his body would scream, and his mind would start mental negotiations, telling him that 10 minutes wouldn't change anything. But he remembered the Zen-like lesson. Discomfort is not an emergency. He sat with the feeling, learning to distinguish between I don't want to and I can't. He wasn't ignoring the craving. He was proving that bad feelings don't control you. The first week was invisible progress. He still smoked, but the frequency began to drop because the friction made the habit a chore. By the 3rd week, his old voice of resignation began to scream that this pathetic method wasn't working. But Elias had real evidence now. He had kept his 10-minute commitment for 21 days straight. He felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer using willpower to fight against an environment designed to make him fail. He was using design to win the war. In the 10th month, the greatest obstacle arrived. Elias was sent on a high-pressure business trip, a chaotic environment with no basement toolbox and no familiar routine. In the past, this ultimate test would have been the perfect excuse to stop everything and revert to his old self. But Elias had built something that no explosive motivation can create. He adapted the system. He kept his lighter in the hotel's valet box and continued his 10-minute Gaman practice before every smoke. He realized that Shitsuke builds the external system, but Gaman builds the internal system that functions even when everything else falls apart. By the end of the year, the transformation was no longer linear. The microscopic movements had created a compound result. One morning, Elias reached for the basement key and stopped. He realized he didn't actually want to go down there. The itch was there, but he no longer viewed it as an emergency that required a response. He had internalized the discipline. He wasn't a smoker trying to quit anymore. He had become a person who simply controls his own destiny. 2 years after he began, Elias was a different man. He had 800 imperfect workouts of the mind and had maintained the system without breaking down. When people asked for his secret, he didn't give an inspiring speech about willpower. He told them, "I started so small that I felt ashamed." He explained that consistency beats intensity every day, and that you are what you repeatedly do. He had moved from a prisoner of his own inconsistency to a man whose trustworthiness was his greatest asset. The 3-inch stick of tobacco no longer held power. The power was now within him.